Daniel Harper tightened his grip on the worn leather strap of his briefcase as the elevator doors slid shut behind him. The soft ding echoed through the glass-walled lobby, far louder than it should have been. Around him, polished marble floors gleamed beneath towering chandeliers, and people in tailored suits moved with purpose. Confident, unhurried, certain of their place in the world. Daniel felt like an intruder. He exhaled slowly, steadying himself, and walked toward the revolving doors. Outside, rain streaked the city skyline, blurring the towering buildings into smudged gray silhouettes. Felt fitting. His thoughts were just as blurred. The interview was over, and he knew, deep down, it hadn't gone well. Daniel hadn't always felt this small. There was a time when he'd been respected, trusted, even admired. 10 years ago, he'd been a rising project manager at a mid-sized engineering firm. People came to him with problems because they knew he'd find solutions. Then life happened. His wife, Emily, had fallen ill suddenly, an aggressive condition that no one had seen coming. Within 18 months, she was gone, leaving Daniel alone with their 4-year-old daughter Lily. Overnight, his world collapsed and rebuilt itself around a single truth. Lily needed him. He quit his demanding job to be present. Hospital visits, therapy sessions for Lily's grief, sleepless nights filled with nightmares and whispered questions no child should have to ask. Money drained quickly. Savings vanished. Pride followed. By the time Lily turned 8, Daniel was juggling freelance work, night shifts, and parenting with the precision of a man who couldn't afford to fail, even when failure felt inevitable. This interview was supposed to change everything. The company was called Harrington Global Solutions, one of the fastest-growing tech and logistics firms in the country. Its CEO, Richard Harrington, was a self-made millionaire whose story was plastered across business magazines. Visionary, ruthless, brilliant. Daniel had prepared for weeks. He ironed his only suit twice, practiced answers in the mirror after Lily went to bed, memorized case studies and company values. He needed this job, not just for himself but for Lily's future. The interview room was sleek and intimidating. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a long glass table, 3 interviewers, including Richard Harrington himself. First, things went smoothly. Daniel spoke clearly about his experience, his leadership style, his problem-solving skills. The interviewers nodded, impressed. Richard leaned back in his chair, studying him with sharp eyes. Then came the question that changed everything. "Tell us about the gap in your employment," Richard said calmly. Daniel hesitated. He could have given a polished answer, something vague. Many candidates did. But Daniel had promised himself he would never lie to get ahead. "My wife passed away," he said quietly. "I became a full-time caregiver for my daughter. She needed me." The room shifted. One interviewer smiled politely. Another scribbled notes. Richard's expression remained unreadable. "And during that time," Richard continued, "you weren't working at all?" "I took freelance projects when I could," Daniel replied. "But my priority was my child." There it was, the unspoken verdict. The rest of the interview felt colder. Questions grew shorter. Contact faded. When it ended, Daniel shook hands and thanked them, already knowing the answer. Outside the building, rain soaked through his thin coat as he walked away. Daniel didn't cry. He simply walked. Each step away from the building felt heavier than the last. He thought of Lily waiting at home, coloring quietly at the kitchen table. He thought of the rent due next week, of the empty refrigerator, of the promise he'd made to her, that things would get better. "I tried," he whispered to himself. Sometimes trying had to be enough. Richard Harrington remained seated long after Daniel left the room. Something about the man lingered. The other interviewers exchanged glances. "He's qualified," one said carefully. "But the gap shows instability," another finished. Richard didn't respond. He stared out the window at the rain-soaked streets below, his reflection faintly visible in the glass. A memory surfaced, unwanted, uninvited. Richard was 9 years old again, sitting alone in a dark apartment while his single mother worked double shifts. Dinner was whatever he could find. Homework was optional. Loneliness was constant. She had loved him. He never doubted that. But she hadn't been there. And he had resented her for it, until adulthood taught him how impossible her choices had been. Richard stood abruptly. "Excuse me," he said, already walking toward the door. Daniel was halfway down the block when he heard footsteps behind him. "Mr. Harper." He turned, startled. Richard Harrington, Millionaire CEO business icon, was running toward him in the rain, coat unbuttoned, tie loosened, breath visible in the cold air. "I need to talk to you," Richard said, slightly out of breath. Daniel blinked. I'm sorry, sir. If this is about..." "You failed the interview," Richard said bluntly. Daniel nodded. "I understand. But not for the reason you think." That stopped him. Richard took a breath. "You failed because we weren't ready for someone like you." Daniel frowned. "I don't. You chose your child over your career," Richard continued. "Most people wouldn't. They justify it. Rationalize. Pretend they had no choice." "I did have a choice," Daniel said softly. "And I made it." Richard studied him for a long moment. "My mother didn't," he said quietly. "Not really." Rain fell between them, heavy and relentless. "I built this company believing strength meant sacrifice," Richard said. "But watching you walk away just now, accepting failure with dignity, it made me realize something." "What's that?" Daniel asked. Richard smiled faintly. "That I've been measuring the wrong things." Richard reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a card. "Come back tomorrow," he said. "Not for the job you interviewed for, but for one we're creating." Daniel stared at the card as if it might dissolve in his hand. "I don't understand." "We need leaders who understand responsibility beyond profit," Richard said. "Someone who knows what it means to put people first." Daniel hesitated. "Sir, I don't want charity." "This isn't charity," Richard replied firmly. "This is respect." A long silence followed. Finally, Daniel nodded. "Then I'll be here." The role was Director of Community Operations, a position that didn't exist before Daniel Harper walked into that interview room. Flexible hours, remote options, focus on ethical growth, employee well-being, and family-first policies. Daniel thrived. Within months, company turnover dropped. Productivity rose. Employees felt seen. And every afternoon at 5 o'clock sharp, Daniel left the office. No apologies, no excuses. Home, Lily waited by the door. "Did you save the world today, Daddy?" she'd ask. Daniel would smile. "Just a little." At a company-wide event years later, Richard stood on stage, watching Daniel speak to thousands of employees. "This company changed when we stopped asking what people could give us," Daniel said, voice steady, "and started asking what we could give them." Applause filled the hall. Richard clapped the loudest. He had built an empire once. But that day, watching a single father who once walked away in the rain, he realized something far greater had been built. Not by power, not by wealth, but by compassion. Sometimes failure isn't the end of the road. Sometimes it's the moment someone finally sees who you truly are, and runs after you to say, "Don't walk away yet."